All right. So tonight's presentation is by Dr. Virginie Rolland. Um, Starting with her bio, she studied the population dynamics of four albatross species in the context of fisheries and climate change for her PhD, which she received in 2008 from the University of Paris 6. She then completed a postdoc on Northern Bobwhite population dynamics from the University of Florida before starting as an assistant professor at Arkansas State University in 2011, where she's now full professor. And she's mentored several undergraduate and graduate students, including last month's presenter, Ty. She was a co-advisor for his master's research. Um, and she does other awesome things on campus, like instruct a mixed fit dance class. And she's, she's a great professor. So I'm very glad to have her tonight. And she's going to talk about her research on bluebirds and how equipped they are to face climate change. So, Virginie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kevin, for all the kind words and the introduction. And good evening, everyone. I hope that you get something out of this presentation. I never presented for Audubon before, so let's get started. So context-wise, with climate change, the first thing that we think of when we say climate change is an increase in the global temperature, and it's increased by 1.2 degrees Celsius, which is 34 degrees Fahrenheit, since the pre-industrial period. And with that, climate change has affected 82% of ecological processes, which means things like genetic diversity, body size, the size of the range of a species, the interactions with other species, and things like that. And when I arrived in 2011 at Arkansas State University, I inherited a bluebird trail, and it dated back to 2003. So I thought, oh, I have some data there. What happened to them and how are they faring with climate change? So the bluebirds themselves, they had a really rough time around the pre-industrial period because the lands were converted to agriculture. And very importantly, some species were introduced from Europe, where I'm from, the house sparrows and the European starlings. And they were competing against bluebirds for nest sites, for like cavities, and for food. Then DDT also caused some issues. Then in the late 1970s, there were a series of severe winters that made several populations crash, bluebirds and other passerines. But since then, nest box programs have done a wonderful job at bringing back the bluebirds. There is some variability. You see some pockets of red here. These are populations that are declining, but overall it looks pretty blue, and that indicates an increase in the population. And so I thought, okay, it seems like they're doing pretty well with climate change, but are they? And before I dive into the different angles that I looked at it, I'm going to show you my trail. So in Jonesboro, I have about 150 nest boxes. Like I said, this started in 2003 when I was not around, but I inherited it in 2011. And most boxes are still in the same place, but some of them have changed, and you'll understand quickly. Over here, it's a lot of forested area. It used to be completely open, but the area has been abandoned and it grew back to forest, so no more box over there. And it might look in general very forested, but under the number of all of my boxes, you could potentially see some open habitat, like a horse pasture here, another here. Here we have a hay field. There's another horse pasture here. And then we have people's yards along the road, and those are mowed open. And so bluebirds can thrive there too. Um, Unfortunately, they don't always thrive because there are two common predators, the raccoon and the rat snake. And there's also a problem with cats, unfortunately, but I can't distinguish between cats and raccoons because they do the same thing. They'll pull the nest out of the box, and I just see that, and I can't tell which one it is. But to help bluebirds, we've equipped many of our boxes with either a Kingstone stovepipe baffle, or we apply grease that we have to renew every couple years. Unfortunately, some boxes cannot have either. When we're in a host pasture, for example, we cannot have grease because then the horses would rub themselves against the pole and be covered in grease. So at some point, we had about the same number of boxes that had a baffle, the same number of boxes that had grease, and the same number of boxes with no protection at all. And so I had an undergraduate student, Michael Trusty, who looked at how effective baffles and grease were, especially grease, because it wasn't really known. And what he found is that without protection, the nest success was about 40%, and with protection, we almost double that. The nest success almost double, and it's about equal between baffle and grease. And what I like with the grease, even though it's really messy, is that it tells a story. And you have those two pictures here. One where you can see the print of a snake coming up the pole. It did not reach the pole, it slid down before then. And then this one, same idea, we see claw marks from a raccoon that just slide down the pole. It did not reach the box. Sometimes when the grease gets older, it gets crusty and it provides traction, and the predators get to the box and they leave a little grease in the nest, so I know what happened. It's sad, but at least I know what happened. Okay, so that's for the trail. So let's get into how we're going to look at this climate change on the bluebirds. I have different angles: morphology, range, behavior, the timing of their activities, the abundance. We'll start with the range. That's not my research, but I think it's helpful in the context of this talk. So these are maps from the Audubon Society, and it's under the current climatic conditions for the summer range to the left and the winter range to the right. And this yellow color indicates that there is no change in their range. So far, so good. There is a little change within the range, and it's with eBird data that someone found that the center of the range had moved 40 miles northward. So in general, it looks good. If we use the model survival by degrees by Audubon Society under the worst case scenario of an increase of 3 degrees Celsius, which would be an increase in 37 degrees Fahrenheit, then we start to see a little bit of change, but not all that much. It's still mostly yellow, which means the range is maintained. And then we have a little bit, I'm losing my pen here. Oh, okay. Nope, I'm still losing it. There we go. We can see a little bit of range contraction to the west in both the summer and the winter range. And then we see the blue is where it expands. So we expect the bluebirds to expand their range, particularly in the winter. So it looks pretty good, and as a result, we call them a warm adapted species. In terms of timing of their activities, there are all kinds of things that we could look at: migration, reproduction, and what I looked at is egg laying. There was a study 20 years ago that indicated that egg laying for bluebirds was happening 4 years, that would be a lot, 4 days earlier than previously, particularly because of warmer springs. There was a newer study in 2018 that indicated the same thing. The egg laying date is earlier when the spring is warmer, but they also noticed that it could be later if the spring was wet. So I was curious with the Jonesboro data. So I looked at that and, well, nothing's happening. It's all over the place, but there's no trend up or down. It's not being any sooner or later. It's about the same. What I did find is something else, and that's with being warmer, the season is longer. And when it's longer, I'm going to tell you a story here, but I need to explain the graph. So at the bottom, you have the time from the 15th of March all the way to the 21st of September. That's the length of my bluebird season. And then on the vertical axis, we have data divided between 2 years, 2020 and 2016. Each line corresponds to one pair of bluebirds. I know exactly who the female and who the male is, and they stay together. And each segment represents clutch that was brought to fledging. So on this graph, all of our pairs have done 3 broods successfully, except 3 pairs, 1 in 2020 and 2 in 26, that did 4 broods successfully. And no one knows about this. I talked to colleagues in Mississippi, Oklahoma, Missouri, Alabama. No one has seen that. This is unheard of. It seems rare, but it's still new. And one thing that my student at the time, Sarah Herod, found is that these 2 years, 2016 and 2020, had warmer temperatures in the first 2 weeks of March, which is just before they start nesting. So it seems like it is related to climate change. And then this phenomenon happened again in 2003, where we had 1 pair doing that. And then in 2024, it happened again for 2 pairs, although one of the 2 was not successful. The poor babies died when they were 13 days old, so about a week, no, 4 days to 7 days before fledging, because of extreme heat. I think they had a sort of heat stroke or something like that. But anyways, it's new, and I don't know if it's going to be a new trend, because many things have to happen at once. We have to have a warm early spring so that they can lay their eggs early, but they also have to have no predators around, right? And those 3 instances were in boxes that were protected. So many elements have to happen. There has to be enough food to feed the chicks and so on and so forth. Okay, so that was for timing. I'm going to move to abundance before I go back to the other angles. And here are heat maps produced by the Monitoring Avian Productivity and Survivorship Program, also called MAPS. So MAPS has banding stations all across North America. And with their banding data, they can estimate different things about the population, like their reproduction outputs or survival of the adults, things like that. And so those are heat maps for different parameters. And they're a little old now, but that's all I had at the time when I looked at them in 2015. There was nothing any more recent. And you'll notice that for Arkansas, it's white, and the white means there's no data. So I thought maybe with my Jonesboro data, I could fill in some of those gaps, because Arkansas is pretty white on most of those maps. Now, of course, Dr. Maureen McClung in Conway started with Kevin, a map station. So I don't remember when it was, 3 to 5 years ago. So maybe now there are some data that can help fill in some of those gaps. But again, in 2015, there was nothing. So that's what I was trying to do here with my student. This is a fuzzy map, but don't worry about it. The idea with this red rectangle is it's very roughly the range of Eastern Bluebirds. And there are climate models that indicate that it would become more dry in the south and west portion of their range, and more wet on the east coast and northern part of their range. And so I thought, okay, maybe those populations, depending on where they are, they're going to react differently to climate change. So I contacted collaborators so that we have 2 sites on the west side of the range, one in Oklahoma, the other one is mine, and then 2 on the east side. So we have Boone in North Carolina and Radford in Virginia. And then these different sites have different number of boxes. The lowest is 35 in Virginia, all the way to 300 boxes. I don't know how she does it, to monitor all of those in North Carolina. And we have some overlap in time, so we were able to compare those 4 populations. So my student, Sarah, she estimated various parameters, clutch size, hatching success, the proportion of eggs that hatched, the proportion of chicks that fledged, all that using our nest monitoring data. And then she also estimated adult survival and the probability that the young would come back to nest the next year using our banding data. And then she used those estimates into a population model that she created. Don't worry about this. I don't need to talk about it. I'm just saying she created this thing. She fed it with her estimates. so that she could calculate the population growth rate. And so here is a graph of results. On the vertical axis here, you have the population growth rate. And what that means is when you have 1, so the black dashed line, the population is stable. If it's lower than this dashed line, the population is declining. If it's above, it's increasing. Well, good news, all of our sites are increasing. Our bluebirds are doing well, and it's between 9 and 25% growth per year. So we were pretty happy about this, but we still haven't finished our story, right? Because we want to know how they would be doing in the future under climate change. So what she did next is use already existing climate models with 2 scenarios, one where there would be lower human population growth, more innovation to curb the carbon emission, and then the other that would be a worst case scenario with more growth, more pollution, less innovation, and so on and so forth. And she used her models to see how they would do under those 2 parameters, those 2 scenarios. So here on the vertical axis, we have the change in population growth rate. So if the change is at 0, it means there is no change. If it's lower, it means it's not increasing as fast as currently, but as long as it doesn't go beyond the red line at the bottom here, it's still an increasing population. The problem would become if it goes below that red line, then we would lose the increase. And then on the horizontal axis, I have this 0 snow depth, average snow depth, maximum snow depth. That's because we found that in Jonesboro, the survival of the adults changes with the amount of snow that they experienced during the winter. And so we included that in the model. And so what we found is no matter the scenario, no matter the conditions, the change in growth rate never goes below this red line. So the population would be increasing no matter the scenario, which was a very happy result. So that was for Arkansas. For Oklahoma, for some reason, I guess because they don't have enough snow in Stillwater, Oklahoma, the main thing that was influencing survival was El Nino, La Nina. So that's what we use for our horizontal axis. But the story goes the same way. So no matter the scenario, things are looking great, except when we have the high intensity climate change under a strong La Nina year. In that case, the population might decline. With North Carolina, now it's unpredictability in snow depth. It's not the exact snow depth, it's can we predict it? And once again, no matter the scenario, the population would still be increasing, not as fast as currently, but it would still be increasing. For Virginia, unfortunately, we didn't have enough data to do the same thing, so I can't really tell you a story for those. But overall, what we found was made us pretty optimistic. The only thing was that strong La Nina for Oklahoma. In general, it seemed like the Western populations would be benefiting more from climate change than the Eastern populations, but we did not account for everything. First, there are other factors like density. The bigger the population grow, the more birds there are in a given area, which means they're going to compete for the same resources, and that might actually bring the population down, like going reverse. The other thing that we did not account for is thresholds. So we assumed all of our relationships with snow, with temperature, were linear. As temperature increases, adult survival increases, things like that. But there may be a point beyond which they can't sustain it, and the effect is opposite. And we didn't do that. And in fact, we only used the conditions that we've experienced between 2003 and 2018. And what happened in 2021? 2 severe snowstorms, Uri and Viola. They broke all the records for Arkansas and Texas and Oklahoma. It was dramatic. We lost 91% of the population in Jonesboro. This is the number of chicks produced per year. This is the number of adults. We lost 91% of the population. It went from something like 700 chicks produced in 2020 to shoot, I forgot how many it was in 2021, 70, I think it was. So we lost a lot. And so made me wonder how adapted are they to not only warm, but also extreme cold. Because climate change, we always think about this increase in temperature, but it also an increase in extremes in the hot and extremes in the cold. So behaviorally, how are they doing? Well, first thing is actually not behavior. They can do what we call nocturnal hypothermia, which is the ability to lower their body temperature at night by 8 degrees Celsius, which is 46 degrees Fahrenheit, so that they conserve energy. And they can also roost, sleep in groups in cavities. So I find them in those nest boxes when it's colder. And my student at the time, Jessica Fowler, she went to those boxes on cold days and see how many birds were in each box. And she got over 400 birds in over 2 winters. And she found that they use the boxes mostly when the wind chill at sunset, the wind chill is the temperature we feel, so that makes sense, is below freezing. So most birds we found in boxes when the temperature at sunset or the wind chill at sunset was below freezing. And similarly, the probability to find that a box would be occupied by bluebirds increased substantially once we reached the threshold. My pen is still not working. All right, there you go. When that threshold was passed, this is at minus 4 degrees Celsius, which is 25 degrees Fahrenheit. So whenever it was lower than 25 degrees Fahrenheit, the probability that a box would be used by bluebirds skyrocketed. Not only that, but the number of birds in a box also increased a lot. So this time, it increased no matter what, but we looked at this minus 10 degrees Celsius, which is 14 degrees Fahrenheit. When we are below that, that's when we have 8 birds or more within a box. And in this picture, you may see these blue dots at the hole. Those are bluebirds, and that means that they are bluebirds underneath, because to be there, it means there are bluebirds underneath. That specific box had 15 bluebirds in it. So it has an advantage, and one of them is not just the more the merrier, but also that they keep warm. So a box that has at least 5 birds is 8 degrees Celsius or 8 degrees more than a box that only has 1 or 2 birds in it. So a serious thermal advantage there, but there's also a cost to live together in a box, and it's the possibility of suffocation. And so they need to figure out when it is that the benefit of warmth outweigh the cost of potential suffocation. And that's a jumble of birds that nested together, not nested, slept together. These are still all alive. But in 2021, we lost a lot. And so the question was, who managed to survive? Because obviously, very clearly, the nocturnal hypothermia and the roosting in groups was not enough. So what happened? This is what the blue is where Yuri and Viola swept in the US. And we had records in all kinds of things, in snow accumulation, number of days with snow on the ground, number of days below freezing. It was never seen before. And in what I saw in boxes, it was also crazy. So box 17 right here, which is on the edge of a horse pasture, has attracted a total of 16 birds that were coming as far as 1/3 of a mile away from all directions. And unfortunately, when we opened that box and found those 16 individuals, they were all dead. That was heartbreaking, but we had to do something with it. And so I wondered who survived in terms of body shape. And there are 2 main hypotheses for that. They're called thermal endurance and thermal tolerance and fasting endurance. And I'm going to explain what that means. So first, a bigger bird, because it has a bigger beak, could have access to a bigger range of prey and therefore have an advantage over the smaller birds. In terms of heat, a bigger body loses heat less quickly than a smaller body. So once again, a bigger bird should have an advantage to survive the cold. And finally, when you're bigger, you have more space, more room to store energy. So again, a bigger bird should have an advantage over the smaller bird. So easy prediction here, we thought that the survivors would be bigger than the non-survivors. For skeletal size, for the size of the body, we know that a good index is the size of the beak or the size of the legs. It's a pretty good correlation with the general body. And the problem with that is the beak and the legs are also the areas that are exposed, the most exposed to the environment, and therefore they lose heat the fastest. And so that complicates our story here, because maybe in terms of heat retention, the story is the opposite. When we have a bigger beak and longer legs, we lose heat more than when we have smaller beak, smaller legs. So we have opposite prediction. Either the survivors are bigger, or they have smaller beaks and smaller legs, not because they can store more food, that would be the opposite, but because they lose less heat through those exposed areas. So that's the first section. Another thing that we were curious about, and I'll tell you all the results in a few minutes, is who survived in terms of plumage coloration. So here's a bird, and I'm sure that when you look at it, you're thinking it's a female bluebird, but for the sake of my explanation, let's assume it's a male. It's a very dull male, and we have a gradient of males in terms of blue ornamentation and chestnut ornamentation, all the way to very vivid, vibrant males. Okay. In normal conditions, those males that are more colorful typically acquire their nest, their territory earlier, and their mate as well, and therefore they can start nesting earlier than the others. And under stressful, extreme, and favorable conditions, usually the less colorful birds have a higher chance of survival. And so we assumed that our survivors should be more dull than the ones that died. So we collected a whole bunch of measurements. We collected feathers from different regions in the body, and we did that for both the non-survivors and the survivors. And I say we because I was not alone. It was with collaborators in Oxford, Mississippi, and Stillwater, Oklahoma, who also had dead birds in their boxes. I indicated Boone, but they only had one death, because if you remember from the map, Yuri and Viola did not reach North Carolina, but that collaborator is an expert with plumage coloration. So we sent her all of our feathers and she dealt with those. So what did we find? Here's a bunch of graphs for tarsus and beak, another bunch of graphs for coloration. And I'm not going to go through one by one. I'm just going to summarize with a visual. Boom. Our survivors have bigger beaks and longer legs. So clearly it's not because they are exposed areas to the environment. So it must be the other hypothesis we had. The bigger birds can retain heat better. They can, not through the beak, but the bigger bodies. They can store more energy. They can have access to a bigger range of prey. And we also have to remember, and maybe you thought about it when I was talking earlier, that the birds, you know, we see them tuck their beak in their plumage when it's cold, so they can minimize the loss of heat through the beak. Same thing with the legs. They puff up, they make themselves big, but it's also to cover their legs. So that makes sense. And then in terms of plumage coloration, the survivors were as we expected. They were not as vibrant in their coloration, both the chestnut chest and the blue tail. And we think it's because those colorful males and females started nesting earlier. They didn't nest, sorry. They started acquiring their territory, they started courting, and then Yuri and Viola came and they had not enough energy to finish the winter. Whereas the dull ones that didn't start all of this courtship and fights against other males, still had their energy through the storm. So you might wonder if they recovered since that storm. And I have good news for you. Yes, they did. Not only did they recover in 3 years, in 2024, I had even more babies than in 2020. And then in terms of adults, I have about the same number of adults that I had before the storm. So, yay, it was not a complete loss. They're very resilient. But I talked to you about coloration, and there's something else we found. And in July 22, this is what we saw. I saw this female fly out of the box, and I thought, what the heck is that? That has the shape of a bluebird, but more of a dull house sparrow coloration. And so I caught her male partner over here. We followed the growth of the chicks, and she's the only one who's like that. She was what we call a brown female. We called her Betty because it was more white than brown to us. But it's not albinism because she's not white, her eyes are not red. It's not leucism because it's not patches of white, and it's not white. It's really this washed off brown color. This is called a brown mutation, and it's on the sex chromosome Z. So how does it work? Because in mammals like us humans, females have two X chromosomes and males have an X and a Y. But in birds, it's the opposite. The females have the non-similar chromosomes and the males have the same chromosomes. And so in mammals and humans, you only need one X chromosome to have a mutation to express it if you're a man, but you need both chromosomes to be affected for women to express something. So for example, color blindness, more men are colorblind than women because it is on the X chromosome. So only one X chromosome with the color blindness gene, and men are colorblind. But a woman who has only one X with the color blindness will not be colorblind. She needs both of the X to be colorblind. Well, this is the opposite with birds, and that brown mutation happens on the Z chromosome. So the female only needs one Z chromosome to be like that to express the gene, to look brown. The male would need two of them. So this is a typical pigeon family. Mom has a Z and a W, and to have a daughter, she automatically gives her W. Dad can give either of his Z to a male or a female offspring. If we have an atypical family, so say mom is normal, but dad has the brown gene, the brown mutation on one of the Z chromosome, well, one of their sons could have the good gene from dad and the only Z from mom and look normal, or the son could get the bad chromosome from dad and the regular chromosome from mom and still look okay because it has to have both chromosomes brown to look brown. And then for the daughters, if the daughter is unlucky and get that brown chromosome, it doesn't matter what mom gives her because she has to have the W to be a female. She will look brown. But she could also get the good chromosome from dad and still look gray. So Betty could have this situation of parents. I've never seen them, so I don't know for sure. Another scenario would be if the mom is brown, that means she automatically has a brown chromosome, and dad may have both chromosomes normal. In that case, the daughters cannot become brown because they automatically get the W from mom, and so that just doesn't happen. And the last scenario is where mom and dad both carry that brown mutation. And in this case, they have even more chances of having a daughter that is brown or a son that is brown. So Betty's parents, Betty is either this lady here with two parents that look normal, or this lady here with a mom that was brown. But again, I don't have access to the parents. The other question is, how did her kids look the way they are? So we know that Betty is brown, right? So if Betty is brown and is the mom, It cannot be this scenario because this one is gray, so it can't be that. It could be either one of the two other scenarios, except it's neither. Because the mystery continues, our DNA analysis indicated that Betty was not the mother of her kids. She was the grandmother or the aunt. Same thing for Dad. So we have plenty of mystery to keep us busy. And we had more surprises this year with a female chick that was brown. You can see the difference with the gray and the blue around her from her siblings, and another brown chick slightly darker in another box. Crazy, but it might make sense geographically because Betty was in this box and those two this year were here, which is not that far from this box, right? It's one of the closest ones in our area. So here's the story. In 2024, we had a male in 419 right here in this box. Here we have a little diagram where a square is a male and a circle is a female. So this male, LXWW, was in 419. And in 2024, it produced a son, other offspring as well, but that one son, GHXL, which I'll talk about again in a minute. And then he reproduced again with the same female, so same pair in 2024, again this year, produced this brown chick. At the same time this year, their son, GHXL, paired with a female I had never seen before and produced that chick in box 224. So it's funny that that gene is clearly is passed on from generation to generation. The dad looked normal, but it carried it, and it gave it to his son, who also looked normal, but he carried it, passed it on to each of them have daughters that are brown now. So it's spreading in the population. And that only happened with that snowstorm because there were so few mating opportunities that even a non-sexy brown female found a way to mate with someone. Okay, so summarizing, bluebirds can respond to climate change in terms of their size, in terms of the timing of their activities, in terms of abundance. They seem to be equipped to adjust with when facing warmer conditions. It's not as good. Our model did not capture extremes, but we had this experience with 2021, and they don't seem to be equipped against extreme winter, but they can recover quickly. So as long as those extremes don't happen in less than 3 to 4 years, they should be okay. They can recover. And then we also have those funny stories with rare mutations showing up in the population. For the future, two things that I would like to do is in terms of physiology, I have a collaboration with Dr. Kennedy at the University of Connecticut. And we're wondering how chicks, when they grow and develop their immune system, if they can fight off parasites better if they were raised in warm conditions or under cold conditions. So these past 2 years, we manipulated the temperature of the nest with either an ice pack, a heat pack, or a control. And we did that either during the incubation period or during the nestling period. And then we added this little data logger to record the temperature in the nest. And we took a bunch of measurements on the chicks. And then I also send the nests, I collected them and send them to University of Connecticut. And they're currently taking it apart to count all the parasites. And I want to wish them good luck because this example I'm giving you in the picture, you might think that all these little specks is dirt, but no, each single speck is a mite. It's a nest mite. They feed on the blood of the babies, but they don't kill the babies. But yes, good luck to them to count that number of mites. It's quite insane. The next thing that I would also like to do is check if their diet has changed. I don't know if you noticed, but it seems to me there are fewer and fewer insects around, and those bluebirds, they eat insects. So is that affecting them? Temperature is one thing, but food is another, right, during climate change. So I'm I'm thinking about using data that I collected with our undergrad, Brandy Gibson, in 2014, 2015. We had set up traps to collect insects. We also went to take the prey that the parents were bringing to their kids. And this is what we found. I know it's all gibberish potentially to you, but I'll explain. So we have two different bars. The prey that were found in the diet of the babies in the dark bar, and then the insects that are available in the habitat. So you can see that bluebirds seem to like Lepidoptera the best. Lepidoptera are butterflies and moths, both at the adult and or caterpillar stage. They also liked crickets, grasshoppers. They also like beetles, and they also like spiders. What they seem to not like at all are the pillbugs, because this gray bar, this light gray, is the habitat, and the dark gray is not there. But it's possible they like the pillbugs and we just didn't catch them because they're so small. The chicks might have been able to swallow them before we got to them to pick it out. But one interesting thing was with the butterflies and moths, they liked that so much more than what was available in the area. And we know that some of those butterflies are having a hard time surviving because wildflowers are gone. So I'm really wondering how they're doing over time with their diet. And two things that happened recently that makes me wonder even more is in 2024, you may remember it was humming all around us with the double emergence of cicadas that come only every 13 or 17 years. It was everywhere. The cicadas, it's like they don't know that predators are around, and they were super easy prey to bluebirds. Bluebirds had a feast. I found those cicadas in their nest multiple times. Same thing for chickadees and titmice, actually. And so I wonder how that affected their diet and the growth of the chicks. The opposite is true for this year, where it didn't seem, I didn't see many insects, but what I saw in the nest were seeds. And granted, bluebirds do eat berries, but usually it's in the winter when the insects are not around. So how are the chicks doing? How can they develop as fast with berries that don't contain as much protein as insects? And if you don't see those seeds, let me show you. In each of those circles, you can see a seed that was not digested from the berry. So that's all interesting to me, and I will see what the future tells us. So with that, I have a whole bunch of collaborators to thank, as well as the landowners that let us go check the boxes on their property, and the gazillion assistants that helped me along the years. Those pictures don't include Kevin, but Kevin was one of them. So I thank everybody. Thank you also for attending, and I will now open to questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Virginie. Yeah, feel free to unmute and ask your questions, or you can put them in the chat and I'm happy to read them off.
One of the things I wanted to ask was the grease that you use. Why do you use grease on some poles and not others? If the results are the same, why don't you just switch to metal baffles?
Why do I not use more baffles than grease?
Yeah,
Is that your question?
yeah.
Well, so the photo that I provided with the grease is on a pole that's I think it's about 2 inches in diameter, and those are too big. So they are very, very big baffles, like 10 inches in diameter, but those are very heavy. They don't settle well around the pole. And so if a raccoon tries, the raccoon is going to take the whole thing down. So
Ah,
that's one of the main reasons.
okay.
It's also quite expensive, I must say. So
Sure.
Along the same lines, I've always heard that grease is bad, that birds can get grease on their feathers. Is it the type of grease that you're using that's okay to use?
You know, Okay, I'll be honest. I've wondered about no, the type of grease is not anything, but I wondered why grease for the same reason. It was used before I arrived by the people who were monitoring this trail, and I never had any issue until this year. This year I had one nest with 4 babies. The next time I come, there are only 2 babies, and they're covered in grease. The snake had brought the grease into the box. It had never happened to me in 14 years. So that was really annoying. I tried to remove all the grease I could with soapy water, but it was the first time. So I don't know how this idea came about, but I have seen it on the Sialis website. This is the website that's dedicated to bluebirds. So I thought, okay, some other people have used it. But no, it's not about the type of grease. This is regular axle grease you can find at the tractor vehicle auto parts stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you have the means, I would definitely recommend the baffle, but grease is definitely cheap and I can cover a lot more in a little time. Oh, Alex Matthews.
It's actually me, Paige.
What?
Sorry to disappoint.
No, you're not a disappointment.
I have a question about the like the biggest threat to bluebirds. So in a normal year, so not a wild snowstorm year, would you say like extreme heat, extreme cold, or just in general, you know, predators, snakes, raccoons, cats, etc., would be like the largest threat?
I have not quantified the largest threat, but I want to say I think it's rain.
Oh.
Yeah, this is my hunch, but I haven't dived into it. It seems that when there's too much rain for too long, one, there's no prey, and two, it seems like that's when raccoons come out. I don't know. Again,
Oh,
I
okay.
don't have a camera out there to really make sure, and I would have to statistically test that, but this is my hunch. It seems like rain is the biggest issue.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
I do have a
Mhm.
question though, Virginie. Are you planning on doing any meta barcoding?
Uh, can you be more specific, Minabar coding of the
Um,
birds?
well, yeah, I was thinking of their diet.
Okay, okay, great question. Because in 2020, we started collecting the poop for that exact reason. And unfortunately, if you remember, 2020 was COVID, and the poor undergrad did not fare well under those conditions, and that part of the project kind of died.
Do you still have the fecal samples?
I do. You wanna analyze them?
We should talk about it. Yeah.
Okay, sure. I have kept them.
I see a partnership in the making. A collab.
Cool. Okay, thanks.
Yes. Yes, because the reason, for everybody's sake, uh, the method we used in 2014 was this pipe cleaner that we put around the neck of the birds. Don't worry, I was trained by someone who had used this technique many, many times on cliff swallows. Uh, if it is a small item like a pill bug, that pipe cleaner doesn't work. It will go through. And so we probably miss some of the prey, and the meta barcoding, which is DNA based, it's the DNA signature in the poop, could tell us more. My only fear is if it's too digested and I don't know, bacteria in the mix could degrade. I don't know. But I'm sure Alex knows more than me on this, so.
Yeah, we can. I don't know about. I don't know how much would. If there's any DNA left over from the pill bugs, it should be like picked up.
Mhm.
And we could like filter out all the bacteria and stuff. But it would be
Ah,
interesting. But it would be interesting to see just a comparison, since you have like before, you know, you have the data at least from picking out the bugs from the mouth, like from before this, you know, when was that, 2014?
From the math was 2014, the poop are from 2020.
Yeah. Yeah. So then you could do like a before and after or something, or just comparison of those two like strategies.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Cool.
That was the goal, like I said, even though I didn't do anything, I was like, I'm gonna find someone who can do it.
Cool. Thanks.
Virginie and Alex, I'll also say we're noticing a similar thing with our red cockaded woodpecker populations that we monitor at ANHC. The chicks, there seems to be like extreme instances of nest failure during periods of heavy rain.
Ah,
When it rains hard for, you know, or all day for 3 or 4 days in a row, the nests probably like all fail. Because the parents can't, you know, the bugs aren't out flying. There's nothing. The parents are sitting in their cavities all day to avoid the rain. So yeah, I bet this is heavy rains, especially, you know, early spring when nesting's starting, definitely seem to be a climate impact on a lot of our insectivorous birds. I mean,
yeah.
all babies are eating insects, so it's hard on all those spring nesters.
I would add that probably ruby throat hummingbirds are also affected by that. Now, it's just anecdotal stuff that I've observed over the years, but if we have a really cold, wet, rainy spring, you don't have nearly as many hummingbirds around.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, they burn so much energy and they constantly fly, so you have to navigate between the drops and somehow feed. Like that's a lot for a hummingbird.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, do we have any other questions, guys?
Not seeing any in the chat, so I think we'll go ahead and close it. Thank you, Virginie, for presenting. It was a really great presentation.
Thank you. I hope I did not lose too many people, that you all learned something.